This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have an outstanding show today, a lot to review, obviously, with all the turmoil and problems going on, obviously, in Palestine right now, including ongoing arrests, land theft, murders, raids on villages and towns throughout Palestine. So there's a lot to cover. One of the interesting big stories we're going to cover is that Israeli Minister Smotrich, who is calling for the ethnic cleansing and destruction of Huwara, one of the villages where Palestinians were killed, basically calling for it to be wiped off the map. And there's some rumors that the United States State Department might be not willing to give him a visa. But that story becomes very interesting, Jamal. We're going to do a deep dive into that. Speaking of Israelis calling for the wiping off the map of Huwara, the Palestinian village, we have the legendary greatest spy in the history of spycraft in the United States, the kind of notorious Jonathan Pollard, who was convicted of being a traitor, put in jail, was going to be locked up for the rest of his life, was released by Donald Trump back to the apartheid state, is celebrated as a hero, former American citizen. I don't know if he still has American citizenship, but he's an Israeli citizen, also calling for the wiping off the map of Palestinians and the Huwara village. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Chuck Schumer, who is the basically the head of the Senate, for the majority right now, literally and figuratively embracing Netanyahu and Modi, both of whom are very fond of ethnic cleansing and theocratic kind of thuggery. But before we get into those stories, you did a really great interview with Orly Noy, who is an Israeli political activist and journalist and editor of the web-based magazine 972. She's also the chair and the executive director of B'Tselem. She's going to be talking about the kind of fascist calls for the ethnic cleansing of Huwara, what's going on in the Israeli political system right now, if you can call it that. But it's a really well done interview. Let's hear more about what Orly has to say.
On February 26, hundreds of Israeli settlers streamed into the Palestinian village of Huwara, setting homes and cars ablaze and attacking villagers trying to leave their homes to escape to safety with clubs and large rocks. They killed one Palestinian and wounded dozens of others. Israeli soldiers facilitated the pogrom by shutting down the two entrances to the village in anticipation of the settlers' arrival. Attempts by Palestinians to defend themselves in this situation face cover fire Israeli soldiers give to settlers. Multiple pictures and videos show settlers giving soldiers refreshments and conversing with them throughout the pogrom. In her recent article in 972, "The Pogrom is the Point," Orly Noy explains that when Israeli officials, most notably Netanyahu, call on settlers not to take the law into their own hands against Palestinians, they are not denouncing pogroms. They are actually saying, let the army do the job for you. Joining us on Arab Talk this week is Orly Noy. She's a political activist and a journalist and editor on the web-based magazine 972. She is the chair of the executive board of B'Tselem, a prominent Israeli information center for human rights in the occupied territories. Orly, welcome to Arab Talk.
And hi, hello, thank you so much for having me.
Although the pogrom in Huwara was exceptionally horrific and tragic, you explained that it is really the culmination of years of attacks by settler soldier militias collaborating in murdering and terrorizing Palestinian communities across the occupied West Bank. Talk about this.
Yes, I mean, violence against Palestinians in the occupied territories is nothing exceptional. It's been carried out for years, both by settlers and, of course, by soldiers. And as horrifying as the pogrom in Huwara was, it was not the worst that we had seen in the occupied territories. Of course, we can mention the setting fire to the entire Dawabshe family, kidnapping and murdering a young boy in East Jerusalem. So was slightly more moderate, let's call it, the acts of violence and terrorism against Palestinians are really being carried out on daily basis throughout the West Bank, and this, as far as the Israeli public, the Israeli media, and the Israeli politics are concerned, is almost sort of a force of nature. This is just the nature of things, that Palestinians are being routinely under attack. The Israeli media rarely reports about it unless it is something as horrifying as the pogrom in Huwara. And if this is being reported, then usually it's also being justified by the Israeli public, justifying it almost always through a discourse of security. That if, for example, we can mention the deadly Israeli army's raids into Nablus and Jenin, leaving more than 20 Palestinian casualties, among which a 73-year-old Palestinian man, a woman in her 60s, a Palestinian child. That in the Israeli discourse, these are being seen as part of maintaining Israel's security, and that's why I commented on that when Netanyahu says, "Don't take the law into your own hand," what he's actually saying that violence against Palestinians is the law. It just shouldn't be carried out by you, but by the official mechanism of the apartheid and occupation, mainly the Israeli army.
We should mention that Huwara is in Area B. Can you talk about security force authority agreements relative to different sections of Israel as spelled out by the Oslo Accords, which are still followed?
Which are still followed only as far as they are benefiting Israel. I mean, as far as the Palestinian rights, as are mentioned in the Oslo agreements, none of it is being respected. But the Oslo agreement, which was supposed to be a temporary thing leading to the establishment of a Palestinian state, divided the West Bank into three categories: areas A, B, and C. Areas A, which are the main Palestinian cities like Ramallah, like Nablus, like Jenin, are supposed to be under full Palestinian control, both civic and security-wise. Areas B should supposed to be under the civil control of the Palestinian Authority and security control of the Israeli army. And Area C, which is the majority, the main part of the West Bank, are under full Israeli control, both in civilian terms and in security terms. But as I said, this is being only the part of the agreement that refers to the Israeli rights is being respected. We see routine invasions of the Israeli army into the main cities, the Palestinian cities of West Bank, which are Area A, and should not be invaded by Israeli army. But you can see Israeli forces in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Jenin, on almost on daily basis. And of course, under the international law, the role of the occupier in the entire occupied territory is to protect the native population, which is the Palestinian population.
So let me just, so technically, Israel is required to provide security to civilians in Huwara because no one else is authorized to. That's my understanding. And by the Israeli military kind of stepping aside and allowing the settlers to perform their pogroms, it's violating that agreement.
For sure. I mean, 100%. We can even go further and say that the mere presence of settlers is by itself the violation of international law and is considered to be a war crime to populate an occupied territory with civilians of the occupying force. So it's a crime upon a crime upon a crime. The existence of of course, the confiscation of the Palestinian land to allow the settlers, the settlements to be built on that land is a crime, and then populating it with Israeli civilians is another crime. And then the army, not only not protecting the Palestinian civilians of that area, but actually actively attacking them and actively exposing them to the violence by the settlers. These are all layers of the ongoing war crime and the crime against humanity, which is apartheid, that Israel is carrying out in the occupied territories.
Sounds like Israel has set up this bad cop and a worse cop situation where they can claim the settlers are rogue actors when in fact you state that this is not the case. Isn't that so?
Definitely. It's very easy for Israeli authorities to pull back when the settlers go too far, even according to Israeli standards, and say, hey, this is too far. We are not like that. We are not a criminal state. You shouldn't behave like that. But we've seen time and again that the interest and the cooperation between the Israeli army and the settlers is to such level that they are almost already integrated into one organ. We've seen Israeli soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with settlers, shooting at Palestinians together. In the pogrom in Huwara, as you mentioned, there is footage that clearly shows how soldiers just stand indifferently alongside the settlers when they are setting fire to Palestinian houses, possession, etc. There are reports by several human rights organizations. Breaking Silence has published a big report about ex-soldiers giving testifying to how they actually understood their role as soldiers in the occupied territories as ensuring the interests of the settlers to the degree that they actually got orders directly from the settlers themselves. So at this point, it's very difficult to separate between the two. And certainly in terms of cooperation and interest, it is incredibly difficult to set the two apart.
Yes, and actually, after there was a curfew, of course, afterwards against Palestinians in the aftermath of the pogroms, but Israeli settlers were allowed to freely roam the streets. Another sign of apartheid, they gave victory honks, chanted death to the Arabs, and other hateful slogans. And as you mentioned, it's very obvious that the Israeli government is intentionally inciting and in some cases rewarding settler violence.
Oh, definitely. This is another symptom of the Israeli apartheid, that Palestinians are being punished for the victims, for the crimes that were done to them. The main example for that is, of course, Hebron. Just last week, we marked 29 years to the massacre that was conducted by Baruch Goldstein in the mosque, in the big mosque in the city. What happened after a Jewish settler massacred prayers in the mosque is that the Israeli authorities closed the Shohada Street, the main heart of the biggest Palestinian city in the West Bank, Hebron, to Palestinians. So Palestinians are not allowed even to walk in that street, which was, once again, the main street of the main city in the West Bank. So they were punished after being victimized in that horrifying massacre. And today, settlers in Hebron walk freely in the street of Shohada, while Palestinians are not allowed any movement in that street. And even the annual demonstrations in the demand to open up the Shohada Street to Palestinian movement are being oppressed. And I was there last week in that demonstration. They are being oppressed brutally by Israeli soldiers. That we managed to walk less than 5 minutes before they opened stun grenades and tear gas at us.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Shohada Street. And to add to this, the few families Palestinian families who are left there to live there, have to go through a checkpoint every time they go in, and their water has been cut off and electricity has been cut off. As you state in the title of your article, the Huwara pogrom and countless past incidents of settler violence are intentional means to fulfill its law of elimination. Israel has been following this policy since its inception, but describe some of the other ways it is being advanced.
Look, the logic is very clear. Once Israel is self-defined as a Jewish and democratic state, the meaning is that it needs to artificially engineer the demographic in the area so it can sustain a solid Jewish majority in order to maintain the facade of democracy. So this is a demographic war from 1948 as far as Israel is concerned. So it began with the Nakba and the mass expulsion of Palestinians during the Nakba. And it's an ongoing Nakba until today. When you look at places, both, by the way, inside the Green Line and outside the Green Line. Inside the Green Line, we can speak about examples like El Araqib, the village of El Araqib, which was demolished more than 200 times already. Right. We can speak about the village of El-Hiram in the Negev, which was demolished strictly in order to establish a Jewish town on its ruins. Outside the Green Line, we can speak about what is going on these very days the area of Musafar Yatta, for example, in South Hebron Hills, where a vast land, a huge territory, was declared as fire zone solely with the purpose of expelling the Palestinian inhabitants,
Right.
and to allow building Jewish settlements. You can speak about Susia in the same area. You can speak about Khan al-Ahmar, and the examples go on and on and on. So the policy is, the large policy is very clear to ethnic cleansing as much land as possible, in order to Judaize as much land as possible throughout the land between the river and the sea.
It's important to be clear that this pogrom and accelerating settler terrorist attacks represent Israel's ideology. I say this because you see the media presenting it as an anomaly when it's very much the norm. Can you give some examples of comments by Knesset MPs, recent comments Knesset MKs, have made regarding the Huwara pogrom?
Oh, definitely. The political patrons of those settlers that set fire to Huwara are sitting today not only in the Israeli parliament, but are key members, prominent members of the Israeli government. One of the most prominent ministers, the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, clearly said Huwara should be erased from the face of the earth. When he faced the very severe reactions to that horrifying comment, he tried to say that this is not what I meant and I meant something else, etc. But he clearly said those words: Huwara should be erased from the face of the earth. Other Knesset members, and I'm not speaking only about members from Bezalel Smotrich's party or Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, who are clear declared fascist parties. I'm talking about Knesset members from the Likud party, the Prime Minister's party of Likud, who said, I do not condemn the pogrom, the event in Huwara, because I understand feelings of revenge. And that was the day after 2 settlers were killed. So they didn't just normalize it, they almost justified it. Smotrich clearly justified it, but that was the notion among even the more so-called moderate parts of the Israeli right wing. Those Knesset members clearly normalized that horrifying crime.
In a follow-up article, you talk about an attempt to whitewash this pogrom by Yaya Fink, a Knesset member from the Labour Party. He started a crowdfunding initiative called Our Civilian Reserves to aid Palestinian victims of the pogrom. What's wrong with his initiative?
Well, that pogrom in Huwara clearly shocked many Israelis, and people really seeked out a way to help. The deep problem with Yair Fink's initiative is that when he was asked by an extreme settler, by the way, how are you planning on distributing that money that you collect? And he collected over 1.5 million shekels in less than 48 hours. He very casually replied, well, I have 2 ex-Shin Bet people, the secret services, the Israeli secret services, and we will distribute the money to the families that will be cleared by those ex-Shin Bet members. And really, he never, not for a moment, thought that there was any problem with that method of distributing money to the victims of Huwara. Well, there is a very long list of reasons why this is deeply immoral and, in fact, extremely dangerous. First, we know the involvement of the Shin Bet in controlling and monitoring every breath that Palestinians breathe in the occupied territories. We know how they use this information that they gather on Palestinians. They use it for extortion. They use it for making Palestinians into collaborators. They use it to condition the most fundamental rights of the Palestinians in the occupied territory with collaborating with the Israeli security forces. So when Yair Fink says that the distribution of money is conditioned with the clearance that he will get from Shin Bet people, he exposes the Palestinians who will get that money into being condemned as collaborators with the Israeli secret security services. That can be far more dangerous and harmful than any benefit that can come out of that money.
Well, even if they didn't collaborate, just the mere fact you give to some Palestinians money, Huwara, and others you don't give them, they're going to grow suspicious of their neighbors.
Of course, definitely.
Many are aware that this is an uproar amongst Israelis about the dismantling of the judicial system. I mean, especially right here in the United States, that's most of the news that's disseminated here talks about, there is these so-called demonstrations for democracy, etc. However, you underscore Israel will be judged on what it does to Palestinians, not to Jews.
Yes, this new government is generating a lot of fear among very large portions of the Israeli Jewish society. The reason for that is because until now, the unspoken rule was that the Israeli democracy applies only to Jews. And while there is another law that applies to Palestinians, and again, I'm talking about both Palestinians in the occupied territories and to different degrees also to the Israeli Palestinian citizens. Now what is happening is that the democracy that the Jewish population enjoyed so far is under threat. So all of a sudden, people are waking up and saying, oh, there is a danger to the Israeli democracy. And I think that this is exactly the time to remind everybody that Israel never a functioning democracy because the logic of Jewish supremacy was always the organizing logic of it all. Israel had 19 years of existence before the occupation. During 17 years out of those 19 years, the Israeli Palestinian citizens were under military law. So we literally never had one law applying to everybody under the Israeli regime. You cannot call that democracy. And this is why now is the exact time to say that what we should be demanding is not just to return back the clock to the time that Jews enjoyed democracy while disregarding the oppression that Palestinians are being exposed to. This is the time to say we need to make a decision. Do we want a true democracy or not? And a true democracy, for that matter, will be measured not but by how the regime addresses the Jewish population, but how it addresses the Palestinian population under its control.
This reminds me when I was a student of political science. I forgot who said that, but someone was describing democracy and said that democracy is not what you give to the majority, but real democracy is what you grant the minority. Last week we had our guest here was Diana Bhutto, who's also an Israeli citizen, and she commented on the demonstrations and said that there were calls to what we call 1948 Palestinians, or Palestinians with Israeli citizenships, to join these demonstrations, but she felt that this was an insult to kind of ask them to join without addressing the real democracy we're talking about, where everyone is equal under the law.
It's even more than that. It's not just that they don't demand full democracy as is understood by any functioning democracy in the world. It's the fact that those demonstrations, the mass demonstrations that we see now, are being led by there is a very clear militaristic tone. The most prominent leaders of those protests are current or ex-army people. You see endless list of ex-generals who committed horrible war crimes during most of their adult lives. And now, under the pretense of those demonstrations, all of a sudden are being legitimized as the big supporters and protectors of democracy, of the democratic idea. I mean, this is ludicrous to think that Palestinian citizens, or any decent person for that matter, will join under the umbrella of that sort of democracy. I mean, it has really nothing to do with democracy. You see the sea of Israeli flags. I mean, thousands and tens of thousands of Israeli flags washing the streets when the demonstrations are going on. How can anyone expect Palestinian citizens to march in such a nationalistic, militaristic protest? It's very depressing to say, but really it has very little to do with true democracy, and it has the aim is really to reverse the clock back to when Israel was democratic to Jews and Jewish to the Palestinians. This is how the Jewish and democratic state always operated. It worked out for the Jewish population until it stopped working out well for us.
Well, do you feel that there is maybe a reaction to what's going on? I mean, and maybe I should isolate this to just the progressive Israeli Jews, the young generation, who are now seeing what's going on. They're seeing, on one hand, the most extreme government in Israel, and the pogroms in Huwara, and then these demonstrations. I mean, are they questioning what's going on? Do they realize, or have they just drank some of that so-called Kool-Aid, the democratic Kool-Aid, and buried their heads in the sand and pretend nothing is happening in the West Bank? It's all about what's going on in Tel Aviv.
There are some in every demonstration. The demonstrations are happening in every city in Israel, more or less. So almost in all of them, there is the block against the occupation. It's very small. I mean, if we are talking about 160,000 demonstrators in Tel Aviv, there would be a couple of hundred people in the block against the occupation, but it's there. And the younger generation doesn't really ask those questions, but it's very difficult to blame that generation because they have never been exposed to the reality of the occupation and of the apartheid. Jewish kids are being raised to be patriotic in the Zionist way from the day they are born. They're going schools and they're being brainwashed by the Zionist narrative. Then they go to the army because they have to, and they don't even know that they have the option to refuse. At that point, very little do, unfortunately. And so the socialization of the Jewish population into that nationalistic, militaristic narrative starts at a very, very young age, and it's difficult to expect them to all of a sudden open their eyes. We do see now some, I mean, more and more people announce that they will refuse to go to the reserve service in the military. So they are doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, I would say. The question, the interesting question now is that if those reserve forces that declared that they are going to refuse, what will happen? How will they react when Israel, when we will see another march of freedom marches in Gaza? Will they then continue to refuse and understand that this is part of the same undemocratic, cruel, and violent system? Or, as I suspect, will actually once again title it as a security mission and go and shoot at Palestinian demonstrators across the fence in Gaza, whether it's snipers or pilots or so. I mean, we should continue to do what we're doing to expose those connections between the lack of democratic foundations that are getting to us as well. But unfortunately, I must say that those connections are not being done enough by the Jewish society yet.
Orly Noy, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's the voice and the face of Orly Noy. She's the editor at 972. She's also on the chair of the executive committee of B'Tselem. Really, that's not a voice you're going to hear much about in the mainstream media here in the United States, Jamal.
Exactly, Jess. And, it's amazing, actually, the other voices that we hear about, but definitely, and of course, I commend her for her work as a journalist, but also she's the executive, she's on the chair of the executive board of B'Tselem, and B'Tselem was one of the first human rights organizations to call Israel apartheid, which then followed by, of course, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and others, but they have been documenting the atrocities committed on the ground, whether by the Israeli occupation forces or by the settlers. And certainly the settlers, and the conclusion in our discussion with Orly is that at times even the settlers give orders to the Israeli occupation forces.
To the Israeli military, right?
Yeah, and most of the time they either step aside or look the other way, while they're committing atrocities towards Palestinians. So there is that systematic collaboration between the colonial settlers and an occupation force to cover for each other in many ways, or work together to make life hell to Palestinians in the West Bank.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamal, and that's why this interview is so important. And when we say that this is the voice that is not being heard in the mainstream media, the voices we are hearing about are our Benjamin Netanyahu, our Smotrich, our Ben Gvir, all of these individuals who are moving the apartheid state further in the direction of apartheid theocracy and thuggery. And we're hearing those voices, and we're hearing this big hullabaloo about, Smotrich being denied a visa and things like that. But we're not hearing this particular voice of Israeli citizens.
Well, I mean, this is something we'll talk about later on when we discuss a little bit about the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who basically went to Israel to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu, who's really shunned by many governments and his own people, all these demonstrations.
Right.
And he goes and meets with him, Jess, and then he says, he pledges that the United States will stand behind Israel with our fullest support. He's not going to go meet with B'Tselem. He's not going to go see on the ground what's happening in Huwara. I mean, and it's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, we'll talk about this later on. Let's start first, just basically by this notorious Bezalel Smotrich, who was convicted in Israel, arrested in Israel for having explosives, basically.
Right.
And
basically for being a terrorist.
Yeah, and now he is the Israel's finance minister. So now, and I don't put a lot of weight on this story, that the State Department held internal consultations on whether to deny him a visa, because he's supposed to come to the United States. He got invited to come to the United States, and now he applied for a visa, and he's asking for a diplomatic visa that would give him entry to the U.S. and, very important, immunity. And now we're hearing these discussions that they may or may not. I mean, here is someone who's convicted in Israel, basically, as you said, as a terrorist. He says he wants to wipe out the Palestinian village of Huwara. So I don't know what criteria the State Department works on, but I know threats of terrorism or acts of terrorism are not welcome there. So now he's now they're putting themselves in a pickle in a way, because everyone knows that. And of course, they had to put some pressure on him through Netanyahu to say, and we'll talk about this later on, that this was a slip of the tongue. My question is, which tongue? Because he worked with folks. Maybe he has a forked tongue, or I don't know. But anyway, why does this matter, Jess? Because it would be unprecedented.
Right.
It's an unprecedented move in U.S.-Israel relationship. I don't think they've done that to any sitting minister or serving minister.
Well, that's right, Jamal. But it smells fishy to me still, because instead of just coming out and condemning it and denying the visa, which would be a first, it smells to me like there's something else to this story, Jamal, which we're going to continue to investigate. There's something shady. I mean, the guy is convicted, obviously, by an apartheid state of committing acts of terrorism, having explosives, calling for literally the destruction of an entire village and wiping people out. And should he step foot on U.S. territory under diplomatic immunity, it would be an outrageous and grotesque violation of, any sense of decency, where, any other individual who would do that would not only be denied the visa, Jamal, but if they came to the United States, or if they were a U.S. citizen, they would be arrested, as an accessory. to terrorism as an accomplice in some way. But something's fishy about this. It doesn't smell right to me. Does it smell right to you?
No, it doesn't. And that's why behind the scenes, supposedly the U.S. Department of State is putting a lot of pressure and sending a lot of messages and hints that to Israeli diplomats, to the U.S., the Israeli ambassador in Washington, D.C., and to Netanyahu, that they would be very, very happy if Smotrich decided to cancel his trip. They're trying their best to avoid this diplomatic crisis, and actually it's an embarrassment. And here we lecture people about terrorism. We don't grant just average people who commit any kind of crime coming to the United States or make death threats and so forth. And now this guy is going to come to this country. Now this is an unconfirmed report, Jess. And this is from actually an Israeli journalist, I forgot the name, but who said that there is a high possibility that Smotrich is an American citizen, and nobody's talking about that. And if this is the case,
if that's true, that changes
he can
everything.
travel on his U.S. passport to cause more embarrassment, because then he doesn't need to come, and then they cannot deny him coming back to the country. And in a way, it makes sense, because Smotrich, he was born, of course, he was born in the occupied, on a settlement in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, lives on a settlement in the West Bank now. And his family comes from the Ukraine, from the town of Smotrich, same pronunciation, except the I replaced the I with a Y. And there is a possibility that his family first came, like we've seen with many Israeli settlers, came and ended up in Israel via the United States. So there is a possibility, just like the former prime minister of Israel from basically the San Francisco Bay Area.
That's right, Jamal. And that's why this story kind of smells. And I think we need to be following it, because this trip to the United States, if he's denied entry into the United States, that's a big story. If he's allowed to come in, it's a big story.
Exactly.
And so either way, it's going to become a big story. And I have no confidence in our State Department.
I have a feeling it's going to be...
He's coming.
I have a feeling it's going to be a canceled trip. I think, because it's going to cause, like as you said, it's going to cause. They want to bury the story, and the easiest way to bury the story is like he postponed the trip or canceled the trip, or that's my my feeling.
Yeah, maybe, but let's talk a little bit. You may be right. That's just like Netanyahu's had 4 trips canceled to UAE. He's supposed to have had 4 trips to celebrate the Abraham Accords. The 4 trips have been canceled due to scheduling issues. They'll come up with some sort of lame excuse. But I want to say just one thing about the slip of the tongue. When Smotrich said that it was a slip of the tongue, in every slip of the tongue, Jamal, there's truth. That's what a slip of the tongue is. You say something where you say you didn't mean to say it, but it betrays and a reality of how you really feel about things. So whether or not he meant it or didn't mean it, or a slip of the tongue, he meant it. That's what the slip of the tongue, his own admission, is that he really meant it. He just didn't say it in the right way. So this guy is a criminal. He's a terrorist convicted by an apartheid state.
He's a liar.
He's a liar. And if he comes here, it'll be grotesque. We'll see.
Well, here is another slip of the tongue, but basically, so you remember Jonathan Pollard?
A big spy, Jamal. Like the thing about
his Jewish American traitor turned to an Israeli citizen or an Israeli spy, and he said now Huwara must be destroyed. This is what his own words. And then he goes on to add, the destruction of Huwara will mark the beginning of our reconquest of our land. And here is an American,
former
traitor. He's there. He's a settler. If people who don't remember that, but basically Pollard caused major security.
No, Jamal, it's even worse than that. Every single person in the intelligence community of the United States has said he caused more damage than any other spy in the history.
Not only he gave like U.S. Very well guarded secrets, Jess, but he also gave the names or outed the names of
covert
operatives
Yeah.
and collaborators. So he risked the lives of many. Anyway, he, as he said, he was convicted to life, and then they kept after it AIPAC and their surrogates and Netanyahu, president after president, starting from Clinton onward.
That's right.
Lobbying for his release until Trump finally released him and allowed him to travel. First he had to stay in the country wearing a bracelet on his ankle, and then now he's an Israeli citizen, very well celebrated, met at the airport just by Netanyahu himself. Right. Celebrated as a hero, and now he's going there calling for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But
so I have a question for you, Jamal. Did the State Department say anything about Jonathan Pollard's statement?
No, because they should be ashamed.
Beyond ashamed, Jamal.
For releasing him. And I hate to say it, but in other circumstances, not only he would not have been released, but a lot of spies get executed for their treason. That I guess we don't have the death sentence for his crimes, but
everybody in the intelligence community, Jamal, felt like he should have been locked up for the rest of his life and not seen the light of day. And this release was an affront, was an attack on everybody who works in the intelligence services for the United States. This is, it's grotesqueness on grotesqueness that he was released, and then he has the audacity to speak in such a way, calling for the wiping out and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and then no accountability whatsoever. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about Smotrich, when we're talking about Netanyahu, we're talking about Ben-Gvir, Jonathan Pollard, and I dare say it's even related to the next item that we're going to talk about, no accountability for someone like Chuck Schumer, who's supposed to head the Democratic Party, the so-called more liberal, progressive parts of the U.S. government, and celebrating two leaders who are thugs. And, one is facing multiple felony accounts and is being condemned by the EU and condemned worldwide. So what's happening right now when you have the entire Western world condemning or confronting or kind of exhorting the apartheid state to slow down on these judicial changes that they want to make, and then you have Chuck Schumer, making kissy face with Benjamin Netanyahu. What's up?
Well, it's not even Benjamin Netanyahu. He made a trip from Israel to India. Look at the timing, just look at the timing. So he led a congressional delegation last week, Senate majority, of course, leader Chuck Schumer. And I look at this picture. He was photographed grinning arm in arm with Benjamin Netanyahu. And then, as I said earlier, he pledged that the United States will stand behind Israel with our fullest support. Then he flew to India, visited with Indian Prime Minister Modi on the same trip. This is the same trip. Look at the same trip. And then he again shown arm in arm and redoubled his commitment to fostering strong ties there, calling India, and I'm quoting, precisely the kind of partner that the United States needs. A partner, Jess. Not to mention, this is Modi, India, which basically last year his government ordered raids on BBC's offices in the country, just like over a documentary highlighting his role instigating and enabling a 2002 pogrom against Muslims that claimed 1,000 lives in the state of Gujarat, where he served as a chief minister. And few hours earlier, he was meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu when you have another pogrom happening in Huwara.
That's exactly right, Jamal. So we have the Senate Democratic Majority Leader Schumer, allegedly representing more liberal policies of this government, walking hand in hand and doing kissy face with two basically Islamophobes, two racists, two really thuggish, two of the biggest thuggish leaders, on the planet right now. And, many people say Modi, for example, not only has he been attacking, it's called the Muslim minority in India, even though, it's the largest Muslim has the largest number of Muslims in the world, anywhere of any country, actually. It's got an enormous number of Muslim Indians. It's extraordinary, who's really been cracking down on like the equal rights of Muslim Indians since he's been in office. And as you said, for that pogrom he kind of participated or let happen in Gujarat. I'm not sure what to say about this, Jamal, but what it says about US politics right now, that you would have Chuck Schumer literally embracing Modi and Netanyahu, it's not looking good right now for justice, for democracy. It's not looking very good for the rule of law. It's not looking very good for the United States to lecture the rest of the world, to lecture Putin and to lecture everybody else about democracy and doing the right thing. Doesn't look good.
Well, you're talking about the optics. The motives are one thing, which really does not represent the Democratic Party in general. I think this is not the road that the Democratic Party want to take.
No.
And then at the same time, even if that's the way or that's the road that they want to lead, the optics are so stupid. I question who actually arranged this meeting at this and the timing of it to go to Israel and pledge support when Huwara was burning, and
right.
to go visit India and stand tall with Modi supporting India when we know his record on human rights.
Well, we won't have time to go into it today, Jamal, but we should talk about the delegation that went with Schumer and all the elected officials that kind of went on this junket, the AIPAC junket to visit, and it's
embarrassing.
It's beyond embarrassing. And again, we're looking at the United States lecturing the rest of the world on justice and democracy and doing the right thing. And then you have, supporting these two thugs who are wreaking havoc on the world right now.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we will talk to you next week.
See you next week.